Welcome back, everyone, to Workplace Conversations. Gives me great pleasure today to invite onto our podcast Megan Hatherley. Megan works for Incitec Pivot. She has just assumed or in transition to the global role for mental health and wellbeing. Welcome, Megan, to the show today.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me along. It's a
No
privilege.
worries. Yeah, great. So just to confirm, perhaps just give us a little bit about your background, because we know that you're a psychologist. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, yes, I'm a generally registered psychologist. Really, my career has been within workplace psychology, injury management. So that's really been where my focus has been since the beginning.
Mhm.
So worked for a large national organisation for a while, had managed national EAP service, then sort of branched out on my own and did some consulting for a little while I had two young ones. And then have been, was very lucky to come along this role to this role at Incitec Pivot about a bit over 2 years ago.
Fantastic. Great. Very good. Very good. Yeah, so look, I'm interested in your thoughts around particularly psychosocial risk management. Where do you think things are at the moment? There's a real diversity when you look across organizations. Some organizations are doing very little, or some businesses don't even know that there is such a thing, all the way through to there can be some organizations that are doing some advanced things. What do you where do you see the landscape around psychosocial risk management at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree the same. I think there are a lot of organisations that are finding it challenging in this space. I think even though it's something that's not new, it's new to a lot of organisations and particularly in the health and safety space. So I think that there are organisations that, are maybe at, a lower end of the maturity scale, whether that's from a resourcing perspective, whether it's from a priority perspective and not really, grasping, the significance and importance of it, despite being in our codes of practice.
Yep.
And certainly you see then that there are a lot of organisations, that are quite advanced in terms of how they've progressed. I think for us at Incitec, we were in a good position because we already had our mental health and wellbeing program up and running prior to the codes of practice coming into place.
Yep.
So for us, it was something that we were already a little bit ahead of in terms of having the resources and the focus in this space.
Yep.
So that our program commenced around COVID, so sort of 2000s,
Yep.
2020, sorry, 2020.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that we were fortunate in that regard. We're also fortunate that we do work for an organisation where, safety is the number one priority, and zero harm is a large cultural driver within our organisation.
Yep.
And have been very fortunate that I think our health and safety senior management team have also seen that safety does include psychological safety and psychological health and safety as well. So, it's been a priority for us.
Yeah. What do you... Oh, just lost you for a minute. That's okay. All good. We can edit out as we go as well.
I don't know what happened there.
No, that's okay. What do you think are the key aspects of making psychosocial risk management work? In other words, we're really outcome focused. What are some of the things that you really think need to be focused on?
Look, I think, and this may be some learnings that I've experienced with our own organisation or more generally see across other companies, but I think certainly the importance of having that, that buy-in or that commitment from the top.
Yep.
So I think that that's really critical. And from our experience, I think we have had that in some areas of the business, whereas others, I think, it's been a bit more, less of a focus. And so the areas where we've really seen that commitment is where we've seen the biggest growth and focus and sort of effectiveness in the space. So I would definitely say that that leadership and comes with that, I guess, the education and awareness piece.
Yep.
And yes, some people are very driven by compliance, and as soon as you sort of explain to them their obligations, and particularly again because we have a big safety culture in our organisation, that speaks to some people.
Yep.
But for me, it's also really important to understand what are some of the different drivers for people. So what does effectively, yes, it's part of compliance, but we know that it benefits so many other areas and impacts, you know, and we talk about absenteeism, or we talk about productivity and performance, we talk about retention, we talk about, you know, recruitment, all of those things.
Yes.
That's how I find, you know, we get the biggest momentum is really just finding what we call the why hook, or the purpose for people.
Yes.
And why this needs to be a priority within the business. So that's probably something that's worked well for us. And the other piece that I would say is just that we focused a lot on integration. So how's it fitting in with our current risk management framework and activities? How does it fit in with other programs that we're running within the business? You know, might be from a HR perspective. So it might be our Upstander program. How does it fit in with that program itself? We've done a lot of work in terms of linking the two within the content.
Yep.
You know, within our leadership foundations training, which we provide to all our leaders, it's seeing how best we can integrate it, so it's not just another thing that our leaders need to do and our business needs to do. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned integration. One of the things that I think holds a number of organisations back is where there is a lack of integration between, say, occupational health and safety, HR, OD, wellbeing, risk, and so on. What do you think? What do you think has been enables that to happen, where there is actually more collaboration?
Look, I think it's definitely it's probably the education and awareness piece, and understanding what's happening within the space, and whether it's psychosocial risk management or whether it's our mental health framework, how that can actually be leveraged to help achieve the outcomes and the goals that other parts of the business are trying to achieve as well, and vice versa.
Yep.
So I guess in terms of, you know, you think about psychosocial risk management, and then you think about the respect at work framework.
Yes.
You know, how those two fit together.
Yep.
And how we can support each other in achieving essentially what's the same. We're both looking at the same outcomes.
Yes.
So I think that's, you know, just trying to get that buy-in from that perspective. I think it's good. It's been good to also, you know, our HR and our safety teams, you know, do work together in other spaces. So I think that helped. There was always a bit of that relationship there already.
Yep. They were already used to it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think we realised very early on that we did need a collaborative approach at that level, particularly with HR. And so we've been fortunate again in that we developed a global mental health safety committee, which included both HR and health and safety representatives at a VP level, so at quite a high level, and an ELT, executive leader team level as well, sponsored it. So having that also over sort of the past 12 to 18 months has been really helpful.
Yep, great.
And I think it's just those conversations. I do a lot of coaching with HR, so I'll catch up with them once a fortnight.
Yes.
And it is just let's have a conversation, what's happening in your patch.
Yeah.
You know, have you considered that from a psychosocial lens? You know, that's a risk identified, and just sort of providing them with that sort of that coaching as well. And I think when they see how it works in practice, because I think sometimes too it can be quite a obscure concept when
Yes.
you actually see how it gets operationalized.
Yep.
And also too, I think particularly with HR, you know, they are very process driven. They have their way of doing things.
Yep.
And privacy and confidentiality is also, you know, number one to them.
Yep. Yep.
So I think it's getting their trust around, we're not here to
Mm.
step on anyone's toes or take, you know, our
Yes.
focus in our swim lane is this.
Yes.
So we're much less worried. We're not worried about substantiating whether that happened or not. We're just here to
Yeah.
understand what are the risks or hazards that may or may not be present.
Yep. Yep.
From a very health and safety perspective, what are the controls that we have in place?
Yes.
Are those controls effective? And can we start looking at some root causes?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so it's, yeah, if you've got a collaborative culture, if people are used to collaborating and they see the benefit to them of collaborating,
Mm,
then those factors will all come together. It's where perhaps an organization is used to sort of more operating in silos and where
yeah,
individuals are kind of used to, oh no, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. I think that can be a real impediment to psychosocial risk management, can't it?
absolutely. Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
something that you can't achieve in silos. You know, everyone does need to
Mm.
be communicating and supporting each other. And, you know, really we're all there with the same goal. And that's to
Yep.
make sure that our people are coming to work and they're going home safely. And that
Mm.
also means and we do require, I guess, HR, because when you look at, you know, majority of controls, they sit within, you know, HR or ops. So for us, it was about, look, we're the technical experts in the safety space,
Yep.
in terms of assessing risk
Mm.
and looking at, you know, being able to comply with, you know, codes of practice and health and safety regulations.
Mm.
We need your help in terms of the control aspect.
Yep.
How are they being implemented? Are they effective? And
Yep.
also being open to that feedback as well. So I think
Yes.
it's, we're here to help and support each other.
Yes, absolutely. What do you find? I mean, the real one of the real challenges around psychosocial risk management is knowing whether indeed you are compliant, because
Yeah.
it isn't a completely prescriptive that you
Yeah.
absolutely know
Yeah.
whether you are compliant. How do you manage that?
Look, I think it's definitely been a challenge for us, and it's probably something that we're still working towards. I think that we have some really good, again, as a business, we have some good frameworks around compliance. We work in a highly regulative environment, so
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
used to that compliance aspect. We're used to working with regulators. So there's, I guess, that understanding in terms of what compliance needs.
Yep.
I guess in this space, you're right, it's a little bit more challenging,
Mm.
certainly a lot more complex and dynamic.
Yep.
So I think as much as possible, we're trying to, again, it's that integration piece. How are we integrating it within our other compliance and our risk assurance processes and systems?
Yep. Yep.
But also, I think it's acknowledging also, and I think for everybody, this is a, I know they say it's a journey, but you know, it's something that we're learning along the way, and we
Yeah.
need to be very adaptable and
Yeah.
flexible.
Yep.
Um, Unfortunately, yeah, and I guess in safety sometimes it can be hard because it can be very prescriptive and,
Yes.
you know, this is the risk and these are the hard, you know, these are controls you put in place and we're confident
Yeah.
of this. But when you're
Mm.
dealing with people, it's not that, you know, that straightforward. And when you've got
Yeah.
interactions between hazards, it can be more
Mm.
complex. So
Mm.
I think for us, again, is that integration piece. I think as much as possible, it's seeing where we're at now in relation to, from a codes of practice regulation perspective, what we're doing. It's attending a lot of, for me, a lot of seminars and webinars and all sorts of things. And
Yep.
sometimes it might be that I walk away from it and the only thing I might say is, right, phew, we're kind of on the right track, we're doing the right
Yes.
things.
Yes.
But it's good to hear what the regulators are focusing on, and that can
Yes.
sometimes really then shape where our focus needs to be as well.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, because if you look at the code of practice, the safe work code of practice, you could potentially be a little bit daunted by, particularly when there's a focus on prevention. What are you doing to prevent these
Mm,
hazards from occurring, and then
mm,
also that you're taking note of how the hazards are combining.
correct. Yeah,
That's where it gets. That's a high bar, isn't it? Potentially
absolutely.
it's a high
Yes.
bar, and
Yeah.
so it's and then if you think about an organization that, as you mentioned before, doesn't have a lot of resources,
Mm,
it can be, wow, what are we expected to do? How far are we expected to be going in this area?
absolutely. Yeah. And it can be, I mean, it's even been a challenge for us. We are a very complex organisation, very large, widespread. So, we've got people in a couple of capital cities, but, when we look at the spread of our workforce, we've got people up in the Pilbara and WA. And so and that's just in, our Australian business. So
Mm.
I think it can be quite daunting, particularly when you look at a risk assessment and the time and energy that goes into doing one of those, and
Yep.
it's not a one and done situation.
Yes.
It is a thing that we constantly sort of do need to review. And the approach that I took probably was in um, being able to, I guess, triage our sites and look at, you know, from what we know and looking at the data and an understanding of the inherent risks associated with the sites or the business
Yep.
function,
Yep.
where is our focus best spent with the resources that we do have?
Yes. Yep.
How can I support and train our health safety business partners to be able to
Mhm.
take the lead in their sites?
Yep.
Um, and me sort of coming in from a technical specialist sort of perspective in terms of just having oversight of that.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I think it can be really daunting. And then I think too, yes, the interaction of hazards itself and risks
Yep.
can be really, but I think from my perspective, it's very much again coming back to really understanding what are, the inherent risks that are facing your business.
Yep.
Um, and looking at where can you get your best bang for your buck. Like, we're
Mm.
looking at, for some sites, yes, it might be reward and recognition, but if we're
Mm.
looking at a high in terms of leadership support, or
Mm.
if there's issues around workplace behaviours,
Yep. Mm.
understanding where the risk sits and where our resources need to go as
Yes.
well.
Yes. And
um,
that's where the reasonably practical comes in, isn't it? It's
yes. Yeah.
have you based on your resources, based on what your hazard and risk profile is,
Yeah.
are you doing what would be considered reasonable in the
Mm,
circumstances to reduce the level of injuries and claims?
absolutely. And the
Yeah.
other thing I think I would say would be for us, and for a lot of organizations, what works well is just actually sitting down and seeing what are all the, and we kind of went like, what are all the hazards? What are all essentially the current controls that exist within our business? And look, to be honest, probably 90% of all of them are already there,
Yes.
particularly when we're talking about early intervention and support and
Hmm.
promotion.
Yep.
What's already existing there. So I think
Yep.
a lot of organizations feel like they're starting from complete scratch. And it's
Yes.
like, actually, you're not. You've actually got probably a lot of these things in place. And so that was really helpful for us to really
Yep.
understand that when we talk about a control in this space, this is what it
Hmm.
is. And
Yep.
we're already doing that.
Yes. Exactly.
Obviously, the next step is to look at how effective that is and whether
Yes.
there's additional controls that need to be looked at.
Mm.
And certainly that prevention space is really challenging. You see it
Yes.
a lot in terms of um, how can we prevent this? We're dealing with
Yep.
people who are
Mm.
humans,
Yep.
and that sense of, we can't control that
Mm.
aspect. And I'm like, well,
Yep.
that, yes, we can't, but what are we doing as a workplace
Mm.
to do what's reasonably and practicable and making
Yep.
sure that we're minimizing that risk as much as possible?
Yes.
And
Yep.
yes, elimination is the goal.
Yes.
And it takes some creativity, I think, sometimes to get there.
Yes, that's right. And the creativity is where the collaboration can really help because you get more people from different angles coming in and looking at the problem.
Correct, yes. And I
Yeah.
think particularly when we do the risk assessment aspect, yes, it's good to understand what the risks are and what are people's experiences at work and what are really impacting their mental and their physical health.
Yep.
But also too, what are the solutions? So,
Mm.
we understand that, you don't feel valued enough as an employee, and that's really impacting on your experience at work.
Mm.
And for me, sometimes, regardless of whether it's a risk or it's just people's experiences, I think there's
Mm.
some value in getting feedback and input into, well, what's the solution for you, and what might work at a site in the middle of the Pilbara with 10 of
Mhm.
our operators might
Yep.
be very different from our corporate office in Melbourne. So
Yep.
there might be some common controls, and we're certainly looking at those.
Yes.
But also from a site perspective, what are actually our operators or our employees saying to us?
Yes.
And how can we utilize that as well to make sure we're hitting the mark as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the code also talks about and goes into a reasonable amount of detail around consultation and who should be included and how you should go about it.
Mm.
What are your thoughts about because there are some people who uh, and perhaps there's a lack of real knowledge about this area, but you will hear some business owners say, well, why would I want to ask my staff about this kind of stuff? Because it might not be a problem. And if we talk about it, it might become a problem.
Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Admittedly, we've had our own experience in the business where we have gone to sites and they've sort of come and said, "Yeah, you've just made everything worse."
Right.
So we've had that experience
You've had
ourselves.
that. Right.
And I think, again, it comes back to the leaders really understanding what it is we're trying to achieve by consulting and getting, and I think it's, let's not focus on, look, I think understanding the problems and people's experiences is really important, but this is a learning opportunity for us. It's trying to reassure people that this isn't a reflection quite often on your leadership style. We're trying to see it from a let's fix the workplace perspective.
Yep.
And it may be that this is a particular risk or concern at your site, but you as a leader may not be getting the support that you need from the organisation as well.
Yes.
So
Yep.
it's trying to come from a learning and growth perspective. And again, it comes back to them understanding really why we're trying to
Yeah.
do it. And sometimes linking it back into the data. Oh, look, this is like absenteeism's been up the last couple of months, or we've had this, or we've seen a spike in HR complaints, or whatever it might be.
Mm.
Let's try and resolve this, and we're going to get more benefit from trying to do this collaboratively and at a more, in a perfect world, at a systemic level. But if we're just looking in that area, how can we support you? And
Yep.
so yeah, I think that, and I think a lot of it too can be in the way that you conduct the consultation as well.
Yes.
And we have a term in our organisation that talks about green framing. So let's just not focus on, all the negatives and the things that aren't so good, but let's
Mm.
try and then move to more of a solution focused perspective as well. And you really, I
Yes.
think, sometimes need to get to people to, whether it's a focus group or whether it's a one-on-one, it's good to get them to that end in terms of, great, thank you for all your feedback, like just hearing what you're saying, this is what I understand are some of the risks and concerns.
Yes.
From what you've also said, these are some of the actions, and try to get them to sort of, by rounding out that consultation piece, we've moved to a more positive place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you want to know what's working, you want to know what to continue to
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
and how you can leverage those things to potentially be
absolutely.
solutions for the other hazards as well.
Absolutely. And I think, that's also an important part of the approach we take, in that we're not just going in, tell us all your problems and everything that's
Mm.
going wrong,
Yeah.
and why people aren't showing up to work or why people are resigning. It's what actually works well.
Yep.
And reinforcing that as well.
Yep.
And I think at the end of the day, everywhere we go, it's people love the teams and the people that they work with, and they love the job that they do. And so even when we provide feedback to the leadership teams and above, it's very much like, this is actually what's working well, and these are kind of the protective factors that are good for people's mental health and well-being at work. But these are the things that they're saying, how can we then look at what can, whether it's, and we don't necessarily always put it in a health and safety, language either.
Yes.
But what's working well, even better if we say, or what do we need to improve on? And these are some solutions, and then work with the leadership team and HR in terms of, okay, what of these are reasonable? What can we focus on? What's going to give us the biggest value at this point?
Yeah, fabulous. Great. Yeah. How do you balance the sort of the strategic and the operational as far as psychosocial risk management, and like the idea around, on the one hand, you want to create buy-in and ownership and accountability at divisional levels, department levels, and allow them to be able to have some degree of ownership on what are we doing, identifying, looking at the data, potentially putting in controls. But then there's also, at a strategic level, you might be noticing some trends that suggest, well, actually, I think this is where we should be focused. How do you balance that?
Look, I think that's where having resources and, I guess, communication opportunities at different levels of business works well, because I think, the things that the side is saying, and you get this feedback sometimes, well, that's really out of our control. We can't do anything about that. And then it's like, okay, that's fine. I understand that now. And then I can take that to the right people, and we could start working through that at that level.
Yeah.
But these are the things that you can do now. And I think that that's important, because a lot of people get a bit of this survey fatigue, or this feedback where they're like, we've told you this 10 times and still nothing's being done, and there's no, actions being taken. So what are some of the quick wins that we can just get at a site level? Let's look now at what all the data is telling us, and what's happening in the east, and what's happening in the west, and what's happening, in Tasmania, whatever it is. What are some of the common things that we're seeing? And then being able to kind of feed that back up. So we have a monthly meeting that has HR and ER and our health and safety managers in it. And we do talk about what are some of the emerging trends, what are we seeing coming out of the data that we're getting. What am I hearing as I'm going around and talking to people and visiting sites as well. And really then pinpoint for us, what are some of the emerging trends or the things. We know that workplace behaviour and all of those things are probably always going to be there, because they're people and those things happen. But what are the really things impacting our people now, and maybe what's resulting in an increase in workplace conflict, or these things we're seeing over here. And so we're kind of, at the moment for us, Incitec Pivots and Dino Nobel in particular, going through a significant organisational transformation project globally. And so for me, it was, well, let's risk assess this and see from a change management perspective, are we doing all that we're doing to manage this risk? Because we know there are things that are going to come along with changes in org structure and redundancies and changes in roles and resourcing. And also eventually a cultural shift in the business. How are we sort of foreseeing some of the challenges and risks that will come along with that? And how are we, as best as possible, trying to manage that? So then at the back end, we're not seeing some of the, conflicts or things that are happening or at this level or lack of role clarity or whatever it might be, that's kind of a symptom of a change management process that probably hasn't been managed as effectively as it could.
Yeah, the change and psychosocial risk are a great they're very compatible activities, aren't they?
They are.
Change provides a really good way of then applying the psychosocial lens to it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice practical example. And sometimes that works really well for people. Again, these are, can't get their head around what that looks like. I think sometimes, you know, if it's a really tangible physical risk, it's a lot easier to get your head around. And because people have different experiences, and when you think about change, people have different responses to change. And it's getting people to understand, as a leader who is across all the changes and understands why we're doing it and knows what the process is. But for our employees down here, you know, all they're worried about is their financial security and their job security. So an important piece of that for me has been around, let's educate people on the impact of change and just give them that level of understanding for people. So that's probably been the big, I guess, from a systemic strategic perspective, that's been one of my focuses over the last month or so. And certainly, you know, investigations, and I know this is something, whether it's serendipity or whatever it is, you know, there's certainly a lot of chatter about investigations and the impact it has on and conduct processes and HR and all those sorts of things. So I think that that's probably another area where we start to look at, and another great example of looking at, we've got a lot going on in the business at the moment. We've got this transformation project, and we've just had end of year, and we've just had our employee engagement survey, kind of all within the last couple of months. And now we're seeing a bit of a trend in terms of the need for investigations. So and understanding kind of how that process impacts on people, you know, standing people down during that period, like what are we doing to minimize that risk if that's what the business is choosing approach? There's a risk associated with that. How do we manage that? And so that will probably be the next sort of more strategic, higher level, you know, piece that we look at as well.
I went to a legal briefing recently, and when they listed the organisations that had been inspected and investigated from a psychosocial risk point of view, it was quite interesting that there were a number of them where the focus was around their method of investigations and incident management. The processes that sometimes organisations or that society is set up to potentially manage and protect staff can in fact create risks themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. Probably my final question is in regards to the future of psychosocial risk management, from a, particularly now with you taking on this global role, you're going to be thinking, even more strategically and perhaps about the future and perhaps about how psychosocial risk management can be done, more efficiently and effectively. We bring in artificial intelligence into the equation. Is that something that you're looking at?
Look, I think we're probably not that advanced in terms of thinking. I think that for me, the big focus, particularly over the next 12 months, will be just making sure that we're getting the fundamentals right, that we have it well integrated, that it just does become part of business as usual, so to speak, and our safety risk management process. I think the big focus for me also, we've just sort of developed a mental health framework. Obviously, psychosocial risk management is a part of that. We also have a program around psychological safety at work. So I think for me, looking also regionally and what's happening, there's more, I guess, momentum building in the US. The US Surgeon General released their paper a little while ago, but I think there's more talk about that.
Yeah.
I think there's certainly a need to make it, to help, how can we make it more efficient?
Yeah.
And whether, for me, I think you can never replace the value in actually going and speaking to people and getting an understanding about what people's experiences are and giving them that opportunity, because I think there's so much value in people, even just someone listening to them.
Of course.
But I think, from an AI perspective, absolutely, in terms of, even just looking at, data and data trends, and how can we do that more efficiently? Because a lot of it can be, look, we've got information that sits in our safety system, and we've got, stuff that sits in our health management system, and then we've got stuff that's in our HR systems, and then how can we bring that all together to start painting a picture of not only where we're at now, but start to identify what are some of the lead indicators that things are probably trending in the direction that we don't want them to trend. And being able to then use that data to go, okay, where does our focus actually need to be from a a human people perspective as well?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's some of those really sort of dynamic questions, the sort of complex analysis that we need to do also potentially at the evaluation end, like that we can get to a point, and there are so many, as I think you're alluding to, there are so many different things that we already need to attend to when we talk about psychosocial risk and well-being and so on. So you've got to sort of prioritize, and then, but as organizations become more advanced, and we start to look at some of the more, what I would say, sort of some of the wicked problems, evaluation being one of those. How do we get to a point where we can really clearly say that we've reduced our risk levels?
Correct.
For instance,
And that's the challenge that we talk about in terms of how are we measuring the outcomes of this. We were fortunate in the employee engagement survey, that approach that we took this year, that there's some good data in there that we can go, maybe we can use that as a bit of a benchmark, and we're going to. Sorry, mate.
That's okay. We're back.
But if we keep sort of doing that survey in and out, I think that will provide us a nice trend. It looks at things like overall well-being and people's experience at work, and a lot of the questions line up with, hazards. So I think surveying, is and using that is one part of it. But I think that, it's really what we then do with that. And also, how does it speak to, control effectiveness is probably a whole other podcast, but, how do we start measuring, some of these really intangible things? Like, we know we have a really high utilization of our EAP program. So we're about sort of consistently about 3 to 5% higher than the industry benchmark. But how effective is that? And it's also, we know from a control hierarchy perspective, should we really be looking at that? Because we know EAP isn't necessarily effective from a risk management perspective.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Trying to shift away from those early intervention and support focus to what are the controls or the things that we're doing at the pointy end of the hierarchy. And how we can control that and measure that effectiveness as well. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have.
Yeah, great. So you excited about the future? I mean, you've just stepped into this global role, so you must be really excited about what some of the possibilities are for you at Incitec Pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whilst we've been on this journey for a little while now in Australia, I'm excited to also, I guess, share our learnings, and we've sort of started to do that with our North American business. but how can we leverage what we've learned and apply that globally? I think I'm excited to learn about mental health and well-being and sort of that intersection with culture across some of other areas. You know, when we look at our roadmap, it's a long one, but it's exciting. And I think, you know, the fact that for 2 years running, mental health and wellbeing's been one of our top 3 strategic priorities within our health and safety business globally, our function. You know, I'm excited. I'm privileged to be in an organisation that does value it. And for all its challenges, I think, you know, there is that desire and that, you know, that understanding that mental health and wellbeing is important, and it's something that we want to invest time into.
Yeah, fantastic.
So,
well, it's been great talking to you, Megan. It's really great to talk to someone who you know, has a really deep knowledge, like strategic and operational perspective, and understands how psychosocial risk management feeds into so many other aspects of the workplace as well. It's not its own thing, just in isolation. So fantastic. It's great talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Hang there, because I'll chat to you just briefly afterwards. And all the best, obviously, for this global role. Wish you all the best, and we may want to bring you back as a guest someday, some point down the future, perhaps as well.
Great. Thanks for having me, Paul. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Megan.
Bye.